So much of our privacy is lost through email, but many of you may not realize this and use email with the assumption that there's some privacy with your communications. I'll show just how little privacy you have with email because it leaks a lot of your personal data. And there's so much metadata that is collected from email that can tell a lot about you. What I'd like to teach you today is first to present the email problem, since many of you may not realize the extent of the privacy problem, and then we will strategize how you can organize your email so you can protect yourself. I have 15 tips on how to use email in a safer way. Stay tuned. I'm on the platform Odyssey.com and I'm now one of the top creators on there. Just for insurance, in case I get deplatformed, please follow me there using the link in the description. I have a VPN service, Bytes VPN. My company also sells the Google phones and routers, Brax routers. These products are made to make your identity disappear on the internet. If you're interested in them, they are on my app, BraxMe. The link is in the description. Most of you have a Gmail account. As an exercise, just scan through your Gmail. Understand that Google can and does read your emails, so you might as well look and see what they can see. Would your political affiliation be apparent? Would your financial status be clear? Would your purchases be evident? Would your legal troubles be visible? Would your relationships be seen? Would there be any personally identifiable information like tax returns, college loan applications, credit card payments? Now, scan through the contact list that is on Gmail. Since a lot of people would be on Gmail as well, Google will have a pretty good idea of the identity and profiles of each of your contacts. Let's combine this with other information that Google knows about you. There's, of course, your search activity, your app activity, your phone locations, your YouTube watch activity, and so on. Do you have a good picture now of what Google knows about you and about anyone else you know in your contact list? Google is not the only threat. Let's first talk about the infrastructure of this old messaging standard known as email. In general, email was never intended to be private. The original design of email was to send messages as open text messages that were visible to everyone. In recent years, the big tech platforms have tried to modify the standards for email exchange so that there is more security. And one of the areas they've successfully implemented is to make the connection between your device and your email provider server more secure. This particular leg of an email connection now can be encrypted. A man in the middle can no longer read email messages. That was an interesting activity for me back in the day. I connect to a public network and I can read the emails going back and forth with some simple tools. So this part has been mostly locked down. But the next threat is unsolvable, and it's at the email provider server itself. It should be obvious that whoever set up the email server can read everything in it. I already said that Google does read your emails. But it could also be anyone in IT. Your university emails can be read by the university IT department. Your business emails can be read by the business IT department, and they can read incoming and outgoing mails. As I said earlier, the format of an email has to be universally readable by design. Thus, it is stored in text format and is easily read. For those more advanced, there are ways to encrypt the body of a message, such as by the use of GPG encryption. And some services provide a way to encrypt for you, like ProtonMail, Tutanota, and so on. Understand the limitations here. Encryption can only be provided by agreement between two parties. Either you use the platform that offers encryption or exchange GPG keys and perform the GPG encryption manually. And the only thing that can be encrypted is the message body. So only a small subset of email traffic can be encrypted. And there's the header. Why is the header important? The email header includes message title, the IP address of the sender. Sometimes it will include the name of the device or username. It also has timestamps. It has both the recipient's and sender's name and email address. This will clearly indicate an identity and a location. An IP address can later be used to sort through a large collection of emails to find a specific person. An IP address can also be used to find an exact location if you use special techniques. This header metadata is a much bigger problem than is apparent, and I will come back to this. Now let's move on beyond the email provider server. Most email goes from one domain to another domain. I refer to this as inter-domain traffic. For example, sending email from gmail.com to outlook.com. When email needs to be sent to another email server, it needs to interact with computer servers that are called mail transfer agents, or MTAs. These servers are responsible for moving email back and forth across the internet between domains. Since the original development of email, these MTA servers have been transferring email using a standard called SMTP, Simple Mail Transfer Protocol. I'm not going to bore you with details, but the main characteristic of SMTP is that each MTA server is allowed to receive unsolicited traffic. Any MTA server can send mail to any MTA server. For this reason, there is no authentication required to connect between servers. For spam control purposes, MTA servers cross-check that the domains of the sending servers are authentic. It also checks to make sure that recipients exist in the correct domain. Because the standard is based on unsolicited communications, by default, there is no encryption. For decades, any entity in the middle of the internet could collect any email traffic and store it for later analysis. This was in fact reported on in a Guardian article that discusses how AT&T captures the traffic over its internet trunks and forwards the email to the NSA. And this was also discussed by Snowden. Previously, the traffic was completely unencrypted and state players were able to collect all email messages going through the USA and then store it. They were able to read all the headers as well, even if the few sophisticated senders encrypted the message body. Capturing a header is not a minor matter. If a state player captured all the email headers on the internet, in theory it could draw a relationship map to see connections between people in the world, their names, and IP addresses, who's talking to whom, where, and when. And they say this is used to track terrorists. However, the data is mass surveilled. No one is exempt. In more recent years, a new standard has been used by the larger email companies like Gmail, Yahoo, and Outlook to do better encryption of SMTP inter-domain traffic. This encryption protocol is called StarTLS. What it means is that when two MTA servers initiate contact, the sending server sends a StarTLS request in plain text, which the receiving server can then use to initiate an encrypted connection that both can agree on. Although a lot of traffic now use StarTLS, and I don't know the exact percentage, the problem is that it would be a trivial task for a hacker to intercept the StarTLS command to make sure it never gets sent. So that would keep the sent email in its unencrypted state. Because StarTLS is optional, this will work and the command exchange is in plain text. Thus, someone intent on intercepting traffic can still do so if they have access to the network, like a state player. One can assume that governments everywhere have this capability. So to summarize, we have to assume that MTA to MTA or inter-domain traffic could be compromised. In addition, large players like Google, Yahoo, and Microsoft have access to most of the email in the world. They partner with government agencies which are also often given access to the data. Through email, our privacy is virtually non-existent, and aside from mobile phones and app activity, the collection of data here can be used to profile us. And as I explained in other videos, it can be used to manipulate what we see on the internet depending on how we are targeted. I've known about this issue since the beginning of the internet, so I've always been very careful about email. Today I will share 15 tips and tricks with you and explain how I minimize the effects of email on my privacy. Number 1, hide your IP address on the sent email. I always use a VPN, cell data, or Tor when sending email, or I use a Wi-Fi that is not my own and shared with other people. To be clear, this is a concern only when sending email. Receiving email is not an issue. The point here is to keep the IP address from being an index to the emails you send, or to have it used to pinpoint a location. An IP address can pinpoint an exact location, typically within 100 feet, which of course can then pinpoint an identity. And I'll show you here an example of an email header so you can see where the email address is. Number 2, segregate your email into separate identities. This is something I've always done. I've always had many email addresses. This way, information from one category, like work, doesn't mix with another category, like personal or politics and social media. You can take it to as many levels as you want. For example, I have multiple emails for social media, not just one. Except for an email that already exists, I always make sure that my emails do not use a real name. So a random name or a first name is good. This segregation is important since the players who are able to read email will see only a limited context within the emails they can read. For example, your work email will have no details of your personal life. In theory, use pseudo-anonymous email addresses as much as possible, meaning do not use your real name. Your actions in multiple social media sites will be connected even if you use different usernames because they will all be matched to the email address. The email address is part of the identity of your social media accounts, and the social media aggregators like Axiom, Spokeo, and Tellius will match all the different names based on known emails. Number 3, if you have a real name email, limit the use of that for things that would appear in a public record. Use it for medical, banking, and work-related things that are public. Your real name will be visible in documents sent and received, so in some ways a real name email will not hurt, but use it mostly for things that already show your real name, like government, payroll, medical insurance, finance, credit, and so on. However, if your email address doesn't have a real name already, then don't add your full name to the sender name. Use first name and initials or a job title. Avoid using your last name if you don't have to. From here on, limit the regular use of your real name email address. Think of it as your official government address. Number 4, employers will give you an email address. Be smart about how this is used. Employers can and will read your emails. All corporate email is completely readable by IT and backed up. Big companies will back this up historically. Because the employer controls the email server, they don't need any special permissions to gain full access. They can also read email as it is being sent or received in real time. Meaning, do not ever use employer emails for personal use, not even a bit, nor for social media, even if you own the company. Your IT staff could be reading the emails. Be smart enough to know when it may be necessary to move discussions outside of email. Number 5, state players in your country are reading and collecting your emails. Encryption has lessened this over the last few years, but I believe it is still a big chunk, and there are ways to eliminate the encryption. Therefore, you should be aware that the state will likely have a database of emails that will be searchable by IP address, location, name, email address, and timestamp, and contacts. If you segregate your emails as discussed earlier, and if you use techniques to hide your IP address, then hopefully the different emails will contain smaller chunks of information and less information will be relevant. Number 6, the safest email is your own email server. If you have this capability, set up your own email server, and it is even completely safe when communicating with other people on the same email server on domains you own. The reason this is safe is that communication between you and your associates in the same domain never leaves the email server. As long as you use modern encryption with the email clients, then you're good to go. But the cautionary note is that this is safe only if you yourself control the server. If you rely on an IT staff, then the IT staff can read your emails, so they have to be trusted as well. Email is never completely safe, as we already made clear. External email has to be assumed to be compromised. However, the one thing that your own server protects you from is preventing an external party from examining your contact list. Number 7, use secure messaging apps instead. Where possible, shift conversations to encrypted messaging platforms instead, with the only exception being to never use any encrypted platform owned by Facebook, WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger. Don't use these because they will diminish your privacy and not add to it. By moving to an encrypted messaging platform, preferably those not tied to a phone number, you basically remove trackability for your identity. The main mistake you can make with secure messaging apps is if you use apps that require a phone number like Signal or Telegram. though there is not much of a risk when using a Signal or Telegram with family since those connections are plainly established publicly. But phone numbers are used for two-factor authentication by many platforms, and that can be used to connect emails as Facebook would do with WhatsApp. For example, my app Brax Me is encrypted and does not require an email or a phone number. It is perfect obscurity because there's no identity. Number 8. Download your old important email using POP3. There are two ways to retrieve email. One protocol is called IMAP and the other is POP3. When you use IMAP, you are basically keeping all your messages at the email server and you're just using your device to read it. The problem is that Gmail can read your long-term email history. The other method of retrieving email is POP3. Using this method, all your emails kept on a single device of yours and the original messages are deleted from the email server after downloading. I don't necessarily recommend using POP3 for all of your email. There is no significant information in an email account, for example, that is dedicated to social media. Then I can just manually delete the messages even if it's IMAP. A good idea to manually purge your email on a regular basis. In any case, if you have a massive collection of email on one server, POP3 will be a quick way of purging it and moving it to a local machine where you can back it up and perhaps archive it if that is necessary. Number 9. Guard your contact list. Purge your contact list. And never ever upload a contact list to any app. If you follow the procedures mentioned earlier, you would have set up multiple email accounts that are completely segregated in purpose. You will taint the data if you accidentally share contact lists between multiple email accounts. The contact list will pinpoint your identity since it positions you inside a relationship map. Having the same contact list is also a signature of an identity. So on the social media emails, remove the contacts. On your work emails, remove any personal contacts. On your personal emails, remove work contacts. In other words, strive to limit and segregate your contacts within each email address. If you segregate your use of emails with your contacts, then those who know you and upload your contact information to social media will get an identity that the social media sites would never see. Other people will upload their contact list and you cannot stop them. However, if you no longer use the email that they upload and hopefully you use a different phone number for two-factor authentication, then your other identities on the other email address will not be compromised. Number 10. Phone numbers for two-factor authentication can be used to match different emails. You may have different emails, but you use the same phone number for your social media sites. If so, then that phone number will match your emails, even if they use different names, and will consequently match your social media activity. Third parties will collect this and assume a match. So you will need to have a different phone number than your usual number. In my case, I use Google Voice as my two-factor authentication number. Another option I use is to have an old phone with a cheap SIM card for receiving text only. I use a service in the US called ting.com, and on it, you only pay for the service you use. For about $10 a month, you can have a SIM card for 2FA. So where I cannot use Google Voice, I have an alternative number. I'll post a link to Ting in the description. I change this SIM card frequently so I don't keep the same number, and that will prevent any long-term tracking. Number 11. Be watchful of the ideas you put in emails. Political statements, beliefs, and other things that can be used to profile you should be kept in isolated email accounts that cannot be connected to other email accounts via phone number, IP address, and name. Email can be used against you in legal proceedings. And even if you delete your copy, someone else may have a copy. So this is just a general heads up when you realize that nothing in email should be considered private. Number 12. Encrypted email services are nothing special. I see very little benefit with them compared to owning my own email server. I understand that very few people are equipped to set up their own email server, so you may find that a paid service like ProtonMail, Tutanota, Hushmail, and so on are good options. The problem is that the email domain itself profiles you. These are "you've got something to hide" email domains and draws more attention, in my opinion. From a privacy point of view, these encrypted services are able to see your contact list, read your regular unencrypted mail, which is the majority of the mail, and profile you just as well as Google. You just trust that they won't. But my personal preference is to not provide sufficient information to any platform so they can obtain my real identity. I will not tell you to not use these services. However, you will find that I personally will never use them. They have very limited use cases, and that is for intra-domain communications. Supposedly end-to-end encrypted, but they are nowhere near the security of owning the email server for intra-domain communications, since there is no third party and is thus trustless. I understand that setting up your own email server or having someone set it up for you is expensive. However, it is more on the down low option since the domain will not scream, "I'm hiding something from you." Number 13, Gmail emails are anonymous. It is okay to use Gmail for your throwaway email addresses, particularly for app logins. Gmail is perfect for the throwaway purpose since in theory it is anonymous. It is more anonymous than one you create with your own domain. If you have a domain, someone can check the ownership of the domain and reveal your identity even with a seemingly anonymous address. A paid email service is not anonymous because someone can contact the email provider and can see your payment method and connect an identity. So there is something to be said for using Google, but to our own purposes instead of it using us. So it is fine, but not for important email. Remember the caveat here, throw away mail only. You can use other free email platforms too for anonymous use. Outlook.com tends to be less restrictive and there is less spying. Number 14, use your Gmail account for disinformation. To start with, the beginning of a disinformation campaign is to purge your emails to limit what Google knows of you now. This is the first line of defense. Some of you will get massive amounts of spam, which one would normally think is insignificant. But spam of a political nature will often identify a political stance. So if you don't want to be classified as a violent far-right extremist, you may want to limit what emails you get by unsubscribing from lists that allow specific profiling. After you've taken these preparatory steps, you can reverse the information by performing a disinformation campaign. For example, join sites that are politically opposite to your belief. This will generate spam mail from that particular site. You can always redirect the mail to a separate folder so you don't have to bother with it. But Google then will profile you based on the mail you receive. The point though is that you can erase the significance of the data they've collected in the past by either appearing to have a change of heart or just make the data so inconsistent as to be unusable. Number 15, do not use Gmail with online stores. Amazon used to send detailed order acknowledgments with your shipping address and name. I hated this. Basically, Google could see that you ordered pink bras and panties from Amazon, the size and the shipping address. Amazon now just provides a link instead of displaying this data. But other platforms still show shipping details like eBay. So for this reason, do not use Gmail with any online store platform or you will be profiled based on your purchases. And there it is, 15 tips to make your email safer. I hope I provided useful information here. Thank you to my patron supporters and those who buy the products from my store on BraxMe. Thanks for watching and see you later.